All right, so what we have is the app component with React Router all set up. In our home page, in state, we have an array of items. This is simulating like an e-commerce store where we have all these different objects we can present to the user that they may be able to buy. They all have a type, a color, and an ID, so we know them individually. By default, we're going to load a store component, so let's import that and then go create it. And store will just be like the landing page of the store. Each item should be mapped out so they can see the socks and the shoes and all those things. So new file store.js. Export default store. And now store is going to have to map out everything that we have in state so we can see it. So how do I get this array down to my store component? That's not meant to be a trick question, but you cannot pass props with this setup. How can I be like, also get this dot? No. Then I'll try to add brackets to see if maybe it'll let me use that syntax. And it doesn't give me an error, but sure enough, it won't work. Just trust me on that. We'd like to think maybe we can do that, but we can't. So I'm going to show you another syntax. We just barely learned the component syntax. There's one other one we can use to load a component. And one of its main purposes, it has a couple, but one of its main purposes is it allows you to pass props down a route. So if you need to pass props from app to store, I would change the word component to render. And what render does is it doesn't take the component immediately. What it does is it gives you a callback function that will then return the component you'd like to show. And because we can change the syntax to have the carets, we can now pass props. That's the main difference. One other thing though, what did store automatically receive when I was using the component word? Every component loaded on a route receives something from React Router. Those router props match history location. Store is now not receiving it. Render does not do that by default. So if you're going to use render, the function here actually gives you the router props. And I can call this whatever I want, but this is match history and location. So if I want to if I want store to still have access to it, I need to spread it into its props. If I didn't spread it into its props, we'd be stuck with the longhand syntax where we'd be like, history is router props.history. And have to do that for all three. This is a good point where we're like, I don't have to name all that, just whatever this has, give it to the store as props. So here's the other syntax you can use. And eventually we'll be using all the time, but right now it's just for example. Well, with the syntax, I can now pass my state. So I can say you're also going to receive items, which is this.state.items. And now this is getting a bit long. So just like I do with my inputs, I'm going to tab out the two props. Okay, any questions up to that point, setting up the render and getting the router props down to our component along with the items? Well, if I console log props and store, this is where we'll start building this effect. npm start. Yeah, sure. So I'm console logging props in my store component. I come in here and look, it has an object of history, location, match, and items. It has all my state. So every prop made it down to where it needed to be. All right, so props.items is what I'll need to map over. But first, what is router parameters? Here's an example of what route parameters can do. Amazon.com. So we'll revisit this site a couple times, especially going to backend to start visualizing what we're doing. But when we're on a place like Amazon or any other store type site, we can go to a major section and get the entire array of objects from their database listed out so we can see it. But what happens when you click on one item? We go to this page that displays all this info about this one item, right? This is an expanded view on the movie Godzilla and all of its reviews and relations and all that stuff. Well, if I go back and click on Bohemian Rhapsody instead, it's the same page, but what's changed? The content. So this is one component that can load a million different movies depending on the movie they click on. Instead of having to make a new page for every movie that's added to the database, you have this one page set up where everything is just a placeholder. Everything is passed as props. So when they click on the item, the component can reload itself to show the appropriate movie, show the appropriate data. And this is what router params can do. You make one route that represents all the items in your store or however you're using it in your app. And when they click on an item, that same component's loaded every time, just new data. So route parameters make a component highly reusable. When you have objects of the same type, like the object has the same looking data as far as type, color, ID, but they have different things to display. So we'll pass this down to route and we'll quickly map it out here just so we can see it. Mapped store is props.items.map. For each item, for now, we are just going to do this all in this component. Turn a div with the items type. We'll put a key on the div. And then we'll display our items. And I did use color, so maybe we can use that for some styling so we can differentiate. Background color is the item.color. So our store is listing out, and we've got shirts and pants and shoes. But wouldn't it be nice if I could click on shoes and it loads a new page where just this displays and any other data I have on those shoes. This is the simplified view. So the way that works is you create a route for the page that you want this to work for. Like what am I going to be displaying? Let's make a route for it that will be triggered every time someone clicks on an item. I'll say route and close it here. Oh, I need to add exact on this since it's the home path. And we'll come back to the path in a moment because it's going to be a little different. But the component it will load will be something like an item. So we'll make that real quick. So we have item, we'll pull it into our route, import item from item. And then we'll say when a certain path is hit, you should load the item component. I'm gonna actually change this to render for the sake of consistency on both of these. Okay. So I got two routes here. Now, something interesting about router parameters is it has to be dynamic. How do they know which item you clicked on, and how do we load the appropriate data? So the main mechanism for passing this dynamic data is through the path. And the way we set up the path, let's do something like this. We'll say the path is /item/:ID. To us, this just looks like a string, but to a routing framework, the colon says this is a variable. This is like a function parameter. :_ID can represent whatever data. is in the URL up here. So colon is like a function parameter. We're saying they'll click on one of these items, get routed here, and the ID of the item they clicked on will be passed in the URL. That's how we're going to get the data from one component to another. Well, what is the component in React Router that actually triggers this effect, that routes you somewhere? We've used switch, route, and browser router. What's that fourth one? Link. Link. Which means everything on here that they can click on needs to be a link. So when they click on it, it triggers the effect of taking them to the route. So over in store, I'm going to change the word div to the word link. And import it so the app stops breaking. Now they're all links. The color isn't working anymore, but that's okay. We'll put it on the H1. Okay, so now everything is a clickable. I can click them and get routed somewhere. Well, what is the one prop that a link needs to let us know where to go? Two. Thank you, Martin. So where do we want to go to? What's the endpoint that should be triggered when they click on an item? /item / some ID. Something, whatever item you clicked on, make sure their ID is right here in the URL. So in the two, I could say send them to item and then /. Well, how do I have access to the current item's ID within a map? Yeah, item._ID. That's just from this data here. So we're going to grab its ID and we're going to put this directly in the link to space. So I can't use quotes anymore because I got to put a variable in there. So I'm going to use curly brackets and backticks. So I can say here, $ curly brackets, item ID. So I'm just making a string here that represents the endpoint plus the ID of the current item. And what's really interesting is if I click on one of these now, watch what happens to the URL. It might be hard to see, might be really hard to see, but if you can see it, it says /item / some random number. If I click on another one, it's /item, but it's some other number. So the parameter is getting filled in successfully. This is purely contingent upon what they clicked on. This is the first half of the mechanism. We are sending the ID to the endpoint. And this route endpoint is triggering and loading the item component. How do I know that? Let's write item page here. And if I go back and click on any of these, it's taking me to the item page. Even though their IDs are different, that URL, the route is still acting as the landing spot, which is what we want. How does the item know, now that this page loads, it's loading this page, how does item grab that ID out of the URL to know which item is actually being requested? And this is the first time where React Router props come into big play, because the match prop has that information. We're going to console.log props. Let's look at props and go back. So I click on shirt. I come down here and look at props. If I go to the match object, notice there is a params object that now has an _ID equal to the ID of the thing I clicked on. So what is the ID ending in? It's a 9F32. I'll click on another item and check the props. Match params ends in 920903. So this part of the props object is receiving the ID from the click. I'm passing it through the URL. And if this is just like, what the, cool. We'll hit this a few times, but I say that a lot. May not be comforting anymore. Props. So the thing we're concerned with is props.match.params. Props.match.params is always an object, and if we're using a route param like this, we're using a placeholder, that object will get a key called whatever we call it here, equal to the data that is sent on the endpoint, so that the item can receive this and find the appropriate object to display. So what I'm also going to do here is I'm going to pass this entire array of items down to my item page as well, so it knows about all my data. It's also going to receive items from this.state.items. Okay. So coding question for you. Let's forget about the params for a second. If I have an array of items, array of objects that all have an ID, and I'm given a single ID, with those two pieces of info, what could I use to grab the correct object? How do I find an object in an array of objects with a specific ID? Is there a higher order array method that helps me do that? Do we know of a higher order array method that says loop through this array and find the one that I want? With that? Filter could, but it'll always give you an array, so you'd still have to take the object out of it, but filter would work. What's the method like filter, but it only gives you an object? Okay, that's fair. It could, overcomplicating things. Find. So there is a .find method that will return the first thing it finds, and if it's an object, it'll just return that object rather than a new array. What we're going to do is we're going to loop over our array of items that are in state and find the one that matches the ID that was just passed through the URL. So we're going to say const found item is the props.items.find. Find me the item whose ID is equal to the one that was passed through the URL here. And that is the one that is found in props.match.params._ID. Because that is what we called it here. If I called this :unicorn, it would then be props.match.params.unicorn. This is just whatever data was passed in that URL.
Can you click on store really quick?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. That's good, thank you.
Yep, and this is where we're actually sending that URL with the specific ID. Everything we're seeing on the page is clickable. And we'll trigger this link. All right, so this will find the item once they clicked on it. Now we can display it. And this may be a little crazy, but let's look at the found item.type. And we'll put the color back on here. Welcome to some advanced topics. Found item.color. I didn't get this until after the course, so that's why I'm pushing it on you now. Because once you get it, it's super fun. And it's going to make backend easier. For backend was not easy for me at first.
Are you recording?
I am recording this. And now you are in the recordings asking me if I'm recording. Sweet. All right, so I'm going to click on shirt and hope for the best. There's my shirt. Pants, shoes, hat. Well, why is this cool? Well, maybe you already see it, but let's add one more piece of data. Let's say each of these have a size, but the size does not show on the list page. They're all size 10. Right? This is not the expanded view. This is the what would you like to see view. When I click on it, I want to see more about my pants. So I'll go to item, and now that each item has a size, I'll say p tag size is the found items size. Size is still not showing, but now when I go to tie, I can see it's size 10. And pants are a size 10. Maybe it makes the effect better if they are different sizes. So just to prove the data is changing, this is magical. We should want to use it. Size 13 shoes, size 12 pants, size 15 socks. So sure, it's a little bit of ways away from generating, Amazon, but this is the same concept. You click on, not fire, give me something general. Pet supplies, dog supplies. It gives me, this is very organized. It gives me all the foods, but if I want to see one food, route parameters loads it by its ID. That's probably an ID right there, the ID of this dog food, and loads the page. But if I go back, click on another one, it's now loading a different ID, but it's the same component. The concept is just, you know, it's a little bit of throwing a pass and hoping something catches it. Because on this page here, my home page, the store page, I'm mapping out all the items, but all the items aren't in divs, they're in links. So if I click on any of them, it's going to send a signal out to my switch statement to load the route that's at /item / whatever. We set it up as a parameter. So this hears it. It's like, I hear you, item / and you gave me some long number. I know what to do with that. So it loads the item component and passes props. It passes props.match.params and fills it with the data from the URL. So we can then search through our data and find the item that matches and then display it. So yeah, it's a process, but it's a really cool process. All right. Just wanted to introduce it now. Is there any questions as far as, yes, anything? Yeah, I mean, to be fair, you'd probably only be building this yourself if you're somewhere new at a company. Most routing for websites and companies you go to, that's already established. You're just expanding on it. But this concept's really important. Being able to pass data through a URL is like servers 101. On the front end, it's new because SPA applications are new. We didn't need routing on the front end until a few years ago when frameworks started coming out. But now that we need routing on the front end, they adopted things from the back end, like route parameters, so you could dynamically load different pages. So it's more of knowing conceptually. If you're working with a framework, you're going to be dealing with parameters on the front end and the back end. And this is what it looks like on the front end. The colon is what makes it a placeholder. This makes it a function parameter, so I can pass any data in at /item / let's just look at one example of this to show you what I mean, in case I think you get it, but you know, don't mind what I'm doing here just yet. Item, we're just going to console log props.match.params to see that object. And now I'm going to manually trigger it. I'm not going to click on any of those items. I'm going to make a request to /items / hey you over there. Well, that was not, oh, it's not items, item. Here we go, here we go. My item received a match.params object with an ID equal to hey you over there. So whatever comes after the whatever is after the colon is what is the parameter. This is like the argument we're feeding into a function. I am a parameter. I am a parameter. That is what this colon allows you to do. Without this colon, it's now listening to an endpoint that will only load on /item / _ID. So if I go here, this page doesn't exist. It doesn't know what I'm doing. I don't see a console log. But if I change the endpoint to exactly _ID, it loads that page again. So the colon is what makes it dynamic and allows you to pass information through a URL with the two parts of sending it through a link and receiving it through your props.match object. Type error, yeah. That's all gonna break. Any other questions though? Come on. One more. Yeah. Every site may not need this, but if you have this page, you know, multiple items you'd like to show and you don't want to build 10 different pages for your 10 different items, just build one and make the route use parameters.